Now, for the tabernacle papers. Did anybody have any trouble getting 15 things offered by the Israelites? When it lists colors like blue, purple, and scarlet, I assume that that's thread. Different colored thread because it's interwoven in the veil. I used it to weave things, so I listed each one of them separately. Okay? Travis, where was Moses when he was given the pattern for the tabernacle?
Mount Sinai.
On Mount Sinai with God. Cliff, who gave it to Moses? God did. It was made of shittim wood, overlaid with what? Gary?
Gold.
Nope. Overlaid with what, Jimmy? Nope. What? Pure gold. That's a big difference. I never knew that until Bob Payne took my Old Testament course. He and some other guy took about 30 minutes discussing the qualities of pure versus plain. And I've never been the same since. Well, if you pay attention, what is overlaid with pure gold as opposed to just gold, there is a difference in what's covered, where it is. Pure gold. Look at this, inside and out. Inside that box called the ark and out. Now remember, the ark, if I ever ask you how long Moses was in the ark, you say never. Because whenever I say the ark now, this is it. From now throughout the Old Testament history. I don't know that anybody really knows what kind of wood it is, Sammy. I think that tree what's the name of it? Acacia. The pictures I've seen of that wood would not provide a chunk of wood like 45 feet long like one of these was for the bars. So, just guess. The length was 2.5 cubits, the breadth 1.5 cubits, the height 1.5 cubits. So it was a relatively small box, but if you build it of acacia wood and then cover it with pure gold inside and out, it's going to have some weight. Gold is heavy, isn't it? I've never held a chunk of it, but everything I've ever heard said it was.
Gold is 19 times heavier than water.
Gold is 19 times heavier than water. It's a pretty heavy substance. The 4 rings on the corners were made of what? That's just plain gold, right? The crown around the edge of the top of it was made of gold. The staves were made of shittim wood, and they were overlaid with what? Gold. The purpose of the staves was to do what? Carry the ark. That's in 25:14. Randall, how often were the staves removed from the rings?
Never.
Never. Now, what was placed inside the ark? Diane, what do you have?
Testimony and manna in a pot.
Manna in a pot and those 2 tablets. That's what the testimony is. If you want a scripture on that, it's Deuteronomy 10, verses 2 and 5. God tells Moses specifically to put those 2 tablets that he wrote on inside the ark. Now, there were 2 other things that were with the ark. One of them, right before Moses died, God told him to write out the whole law and have a copy of the law put inside the ark, or in the side of the ark. That's in Deuteronomy 31, 24 through 26. And Aaron's rod that budded, that you'll read about later, that's number 17, that was added to it.
Was there some golden emeralds?
Later, you know, I don't remember. They brought a lot of trophies to the tabernacle. All right, Sheila, the mercy seat was made of what? What was the length of it? 2.5 cubits, and the breadth? 1.5. In other words, it was made to fit perfectly on top of the ark. Cherubim were part of the mercy seat. There were 2 of them. They were made of what? Gold. And they faced each other over the mercy seat. They were cherubim that covered the mercy seat. And it's interesting in Ezekiel that Lucifer, that fallen cherubim, is called the cherubim that covereth.
What those cherubim, pure gold?
Seems to me as if they ought to be, but I have gold here. Well, beaten gold. Well, let's look at those verses there in Exodus 25:17, and you'll see what it says. 25, 18, 19, somewhere along in there. 20. What does it say the cherubim are made of? Just gold, right? I thought I did this fairly carefully. It doesn't make any sense for them to just call them gold when they're part of the mercy seat, but that's what's in the text. All right, enough time on that. Cherubims had wings, of course, and the mercy seat was placed on top of the ark. And who met and communed with Moses from above the mercy seat and between the cherubim? God did. Look at Numbers 7:89. Chapter 7, this is the second longest chapter in the Bible. Numbers chapter 7. What does that say? Bob, read that.
And when Moses was gone into the tabernacle of the congregation to speak with him, then he heard the voice of one speaking unto him from off the mercy seat that was upon the ark of testimony, from between the two cherubims, and he spake unto him.
Yep. So when Moses needed to talk to God, and he talked to him just as a friend, it says face to face, so to speak, even though nobody's ever been able to see the face of God. That's where he went into the most holy and kneeled down before the most holy ark. And God spoke to him and gave him his answers. And that's where God gets the title, He that dwelleth between the cherubim. Look at 1 Samuel 4:4. First Samuel 4:4. It says, So the people went to Shiloh, that they may bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubim. That's what he's called all the way through the Old Testament. Psalm 80 verse 1. We'll skip the rest of them up to 80 verse 1. The 80th Psalm and the first verse. Kathy, you got that already? Read that for us.
Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a flock, thou that dwellest between the cherubim, shine forth.
Right. Thou that dwellest between the cherubim, shine forth. What about Psalm 99 verse 1? I think I remember one being there. Psalm 99 verse 1. Read that, Amanda.
The Lord reigneth, let the people tremble. He sitteth between the cherubims, let the earth be moved.
Now the cherubim between which God sits are not statues. You know that, don't you? They're living beings, living creatures in heaven. And there are a bunch more living creatures than just 2 or 4 cherubim. But Moses and Israel didn't have the time to build all that other stuff that's really up there. This is just a symbol of it. The table, made of shittim wood, overlaid with pure gold. The crown was made of gold, 2 cubits long, which is 3 feet, 1.5 feet, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits tall. You had to kneel down to eat from this table. How wide was the border of gold around about? A handbreadth. And a crown of gold was for the border there. The 4 rings were made of gold, had 4 feet or legs. The staves were made of shittim wood overlaid with gold. The dishes and the spoons and the covers and the bowls were all of pure gold. And the showbread was always on the table. How often, does anybody remember, Earl, you remember how often he replaced the showbread and the priest ate the old and then put the new before the Lord 7 days? Remember what day of the week they ate the old bread? I gave you the answer when I asked the question. I said, how long did they let the bread stay there for those 7 days? Every Sabbath day they cooked new bread and put it on the table, and the priest ate the old. The tabernacle, inside the tabernacle, the table was on the north wall. The candlestick was made of pure gold. It had 6 branches and 7 lamps. Does that make sense to your brain? The center stem also had a light on it. A talent of gold was used to make it. The tongs and the snuff dishes were made of pure gold, and it was put on the south wall. All right, the tabernacle itself. This is the actual tent. The tabernacle roof was basically, you might as well say, 4 layers thick. First layer was made of fine twined linen. That's like the ceiling on the inside. The fine twined linen was made up of large pieces called curtains, and then it was put together. Layers 2, 3, and 4 were called coverings, and these too were made up of large pieces called curtains joined together to form each separate layer of covering for the tabernacle. Cubit is 18 inches. The first layer, which was like the ceiling on the inside, made of fine twined linen, blue, scarlet, purple, cherubim woven in it so you could see it looking up. How many large pieces of curtains were used to make up this first layer, Amanda? 10. What was the length of each curtain, Amanda? 28 cubits. And how wide?
4.
That's 6 feet. Each piece was 6 feet wide and 42 feet long. 5 curtains were joined together. The other 5 were joined together, and these were connected with 50 loops of gold. 50 taches or buckles made of gold. 50 blue and 50 buckles. There may be 100 in all when you add it all up. I don't know.
Well, I mean, a belt has a loop on one side and a buckle on the other.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So it could be just 50 loops and 50 taches if that attachment comes from one group of curtains through the loop and back to the other group of curtains. But what would it attach to? You got to have something to attach to over here, wouldn't it? Listen, there's nobody on this planet that can draw you a scale and have everything the way it was. Nobody knows. You know, when you read this, you know as much as the greatest scholar on the planet that's teaching at Oxford University. This is all the information there is.
Let's see what this means right here. 50 loops shalt thou make into one curtain, and 50 loops shalt thou make in the edge of the curtain that is in the cover of the second.
So that sounds like 100.
Sound like 50 here, 50 here.
50 there.
50
And the buckles, buckling them together, that's what it, yeah. I had 50 here and I had 100 in all written underneath it.
We'll do 50 or we'll put 100
I want you to do whatever you feel is the right thing.
I don't really feel nothing about it.
Well, then don't do nothing about it. Okay. All right, the first layer after the fine twined linen. Layer number 2, the goat's hair. There were 11 of them, not 10, because they're going to cover completely the first layer. Nobody on the outside can see any of those cherubim that were on that first layer. This covers it all. See, they're longer too, 30 cubits instead of 28. Still 6 feet wide. 5 curtains were together, 6 curtains were together, coupled together. The 2 groups of curtains then were linked together with 50 loops. I have 100 in all. That's what it sounds like. And they're made of brass. They're not inside the tabernacle, so you go to brass when you start getting on the outside of the tabernacle. Brass altars on the outside. A gold altar is inside. So you got goat's hair, then you got ram skins, then you got badger skins. 3 layers, and each layer gets hairier and more waterproof. Jimmy, you ever carried a badger skin? Somebody said they were pretty heavy. One of them. Take a good man to carry a handful. There's a lot of weight. Well, you've got, let's start with the second layer. 45 times 6. How many square feet is that?
Isn't it 60 times 45? The width of them? There's 10 of them, isn't there?
6 feet times 45 feet is what I was thinking.
That's just one strip.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
There's 10 strips on each
So you got to add a 0 to all this.
11 strips on the one.
Oh, I got to add another one. Somebody help me. It keeps getting bigger. The numbers keep going up.
700 plus 270.
66 times 45. Isn't it 2970?
Oh, 66. That's for that one curtain. There's 4 layers, right?
Well, 3 of the layers is what I'm talking about, and they all had 11.
Right, so there's 3 of those.
Right.
So that'd be
The first layer just had 10 of those pieces that were 6 feet wide. 2970 square feet per times 3. for each layer. Wow, it's getting on up there. Okay, the door of the tabernacle, made of fine twined linen, blue, purple, scarlet, hanging on 5 pillars made of shittim wood covered with gold. And now that's a clue. If the 5 pillars were overlaid with gold, then it lets you know that the curtain hung on the outside of the pillars, not on the inside of the pillars. If the curtain hung on the inside of the pillars would be made of brass. So we know where the curtain hangs now. The 5 pillars are on the inside of the tabernacle, made of gold. They're hooks of gold, they're sockets made of brass. The chapiters, or the tops, and the fillets, which were grooves in the pillars, were made of gold. And God's always saying, remember to make it the way I showed you. Now the boards, made of shittim wood, overlaid with gold, 10 cubits, that's 15 feet tall, if they stood up, and they did. And the breadth was about 27 inches, over 2 feet wide. There's another measurement here we don't have. It's not given to us. And that is how thick they were when they stood up. We know they were 27 inches, a cubit and a half wide. And we know when they stood up, they were 15 feet tall, but we're not given the thickness.
If the fine twined linen stayed on the inside with all the cherubims now,
Uh-huh.
and then the 45-foot one would go right to the outside of the others, keep the rain out, that lets you go 3 foot in between, right?
So I figured that was the thickness of the boards. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me see if we can figure this out. We're trying to figure the thickness of these boards here. All right. Jimmy's saying this first layer with all the cherubim on them. Let's have to draw all these cherubim in there. Now, how wide is this?
42, they was 42 feet, those first curtains was,
42 feet.
the first one, and the other ones is 45.
And the next layer of curtains were 3 feet longer. 3 feet longer this way.
Yeah.
These were the 10 of them on the first layer. The other 3 layers were 1.5 feet longer on each side, right? 18 inches longer on each side. So you take the next layer and lay it on top of that layer, you ended up, I don't know about the ends yet, with something 1.5 feet longer. Now, why do you think that makes the boards 1 cubit thick?
Because I figured they went to the outside of the board. One's on the inside, like your blocks here, like your ceiling is, and the other ones went to the outside to keep the rain out. I just figured it was 18-inch thick boards.
Okay, now this is what I'm understanding you say. That first layer, this is pretend like we got a first layer here of cherubim up here. Now, when the curtains came down, you're saying they came down the inside of the wall?
I think the inside one fit right to the inside, because that's what's really showing.
But we can't have that,
Like that.
because we're told how wide this is. It's got 10 boards, and they are how many cubits wide? On the back side, on the west side, we end up with 10 boards. Do you have my pictures of the boards that I drew?
8 boards on the back.
There's 8 boards, but they got 2 corner boards that they talk about. That makes 10. How many cubits total on those 10 boards? What, Jason?
You have 8 boards. Yeah, you drew 8.
Oh, I just have 8?
That's what I have on my sheet.
It's 6 plus 2 corner boards.
Oh, it's 6. I'm sorry. I thought it was 8 plus 2. It's 6.2. I'm going by memory. 6 boards on the end plus the 2 corner boards. That makes 8. Now, if there are 8 boards on the back end and they are 1.5 cubits each, that's 8 plus 4, 12. Is that 12 cubits the total there? 12 cubits total is the width here for the tabernacle. That's 18 feet, Jimmy, is all we have for the width of the tabernacle.
On the outside edge.
On the outside, the back end of it. So when you say it hung down, were you thinking about hanging down inside the walls or outside the walls?
I was thinking it fits from wall to wall.
Because they're 42 feet and tabernacle's not but 18. So you really can't figure, I don't think you can figure the thickness of the boards by the width of these curtains, or length of them. But I do think you're right that the boards were a cubit thick. I'll tell you why. Even though I touched on this before. Solomon's temple was built to this same scale, you just doubled it. This is 45 feet long, the tabernacle was 45 feet. Solomon's temple was 90. And it does give us the precise measurements of the most holy room in Solomon's temple. And the inside is a 30-foot cube. It's 30 feet straight up, 30 feet wide and 30 feet long. Now if we cut that in half, we got to come up with 15 feet inside here. But how are we going to get from 18 on the outside to 15 on the inside? The only way is to have a 1 cubit thick wall. On the outside then it would be 18, and on the inside we'd be left with 15, because it'd be 1.5 foot thick walls all the way around. 15 feet tall, 27 inches wide, and 18 inches thick. They called them boards. These were tree trunks.
These were
tree trunks. Yes, they were. It had to be strong. I mean, there was an enormous amount of weight on top of this. Assembling it, and each one of those boards had sockets, and the other had a tenon that fit into the socket for it to fit together like a puzzle. And they were covered with gold all over. On top of the weight of the wood, you're getting into the tons per board. If we're figuring this right, at 1.5 foot thick. Maybe Shatim wood was a real lightweight wood, she said. I wonder, pictures I've seen of acacia trees, they're nowhere near the kind of trees that can produce that kind of lumber. And if these bars that ran along the sides to kind of tie it all together and fit it together, they were 45 feet long. They went from end to end. And one of them, it said there were 5 of them on each side. The one in the center ran through all these boards from end to end. Inside, through all the boards from end to end. That'd take a pretty good sized tree to provide that. And that was covered with gold. And sometimes, according to the book of Numbers, I think you might have read this verse, whenever the cloud moves, it says whether it was a day. Can you imagine putting this thing up and the next day the cloud picks up again? Take it all apart. A day or a week or a month or a year, however long it stayed, they had to assemble, disassemble, load up, carry, assemble, disassemble, keep moving through the wilderness.
Did they get the Shittim wood from the Egyptians?
They may have. And there are cave paintings in Egypt that show forests and animals that don't belong anywhere but in a forest in the deserts in Egypt now. So Egypt may have been a much lusher place at one time before God got there and did what he did.
Doing some kind of trade amongst the Mediterranean countries?
Yeah, could have come from, the Egyptians gave Israel whatever they asked for when they left. Israel spoiled the Egyptians. They were very willing to give them whatever they wanted just to get out of their country. Gold, silver, they were very rich when they left Egypt.
I didn't see one tree in all of Israel that would have fit that bill.
I didn't either. Israel was not a old forest type place at all. So we just don't know. It's just a mystery, but they got them. Now what they were doing carrying them around in the wilderness, did they cut them down there? Were they living there at that time? I don't know. Nobody knows.
Could have just been in the wilderness.
Could have been in the wilderness. Well, they're not there now. Well, this is just a rocky, barren place. Well, those are the boards. Oh, we didn't even go over the boards, did we? Shittim wood overlaid with gold. I think that gold was over the whole board, not just on the inside. If, Jimmy, that first ceiling layer with the cherubim draped over, then there's a page that I handed out with the board sheet that shows you how far down the sides it would come, that first layer. It's the length of the tabernacle curtain. It would come down to about, well, we could figure it up. We had a total of 30 feet on both sides, and then if we had 18, that's 48 feet.
42 feet.
So it would leave 3 feet on each side. 3 feet up off each side. Now the next 3 layers would cover them by 1.5 feet or so. So the layer with cherubim would never be seen from the outside. And the boards were considered inside the tabernacle. If that's the case, and they would be gold. Hope I'm making sense. It's kind of hard to keep up with sometime. There were 20 boards on the south side, 20 on the north, 6 on the west, and how many on the east? None. There were no boards on the east. All they had was 5 pillars to hang the curtains on. There are no corner boards on the east that I know of. I said, how many on the east? So everybody got this? No boards here on the east side. Just a curtain hanging on 5 golden pillars. A curtain for a door. Tenons on each board and sockets on each board were 2. This board had a tenon here and there, and this board had a socket to receive it. But that's how the boards were made. They just slid into each other, just like pieces of puzzle. And all of that covered with gold. The bars were made of shittim wood. Oh, there were 48 boards in all, in a standing up position. The bars, which held all the sides together, made of shittim wood, overlaid with gold, 5 of them on three of those sides, and the middle bar shot through in the middle of the standing boards from end to end. That's a 45-foot long board, and we're not told how thick the bars were, or whether they were round or square. Nothing. They were just connectors. There were 15 of them in all. They went through rings of gold. In verse 29 it says the bars went through rings of gold. Now that's not the center bar. That went through the wood pieces to the center of the wood. The veil, what 3 colors went into the veil of fine twined linen? Blue, purple, scarlet. The veil hung upon what? 4 pillars on the inside. I do not know what 4 pillars represent. I don't know. I don't know what the 5 pillars represent. I suspect it has something to do with the science, the physics of gravity, where you leave the earth and get up into the sky. And these 4 pillars, I suspect, have something to do with the nature of the human body, the flesh. If scientists were more humble and would seek God, they would find out.
Amen.
But I don't know. But I know it represents something in our world, something in our creation about heaven and the physics of our getting there. They were overlaid with gold, those 4 pillars. The hooks were made of gold, sockets made of silver. How many hooks were there? I'm guessing 4. Because this has 4 sockets, you got to have 4 hooks. The veil divided into 2 rooms, the holy place and the most holy, and the ark and the mercy seat were brought into that other room. The altar of burnt offering. It was made of wood. Isn't that odd? An altar made of wood, overlaid with brass. Shittim wood, yes. 7.5 feet square, 5 cubits length, 5 cubits breadth, and 4.5 feet tall, 3 cubits tall. It had 4 horns. They were made of shittim wood overlaid with brass.
What are horns? What do you mean by horns?
On the altar, they're little extensions on the corners of the altar, the 4 corners. They just looked like horns rising up. 4 rings of brass. The staves with which to carry this were made of wood overlaid with brass, and it was hollow inside to catch the ashes. I think it had a grate in there, didn't it? Mention a grate. The altar of incense, the altar and its horns were made of shittim wood overlaid with pure gold. This is the altar of incense that's right outside the veil before the most holy room. 1.5 feet wide, square at the top, 3 cubits tall. You had to kind of bend over to burn incense on this. And incense represented what? 3 feet. Did I say 3 feet?
You said 3 cubits.
Oh, sorry. 2 cubits, 3 feet tall. And what did the incense represent? Prayers of the saints. The crown was made of gold. It only had 2 rings. That's odd, isn't it? It didn't have 4, so the staves could go on both sides of it flat. It only had 2 rings. In other words, as it went along, as they carried it, it was swinging. It was in motion. These rings were made of gold. The sticks that carried them were made of shittim wood overlaid with gold. And he had to burn incense twice daily. Never had burnt offerings on this altar. Once a year, they put a little blood on this altar, Day of Atonement. And on another occasion, a special sacrifice, but that's a different issue in Leviticus. How often was blood placed on the horns of this altar? Let's just say once. There were exceptions. Rare, but exceptions. The laver is just a wash pot. It's outside. It was made of brass and used for the priests washing their hands and feet when they went to the altar or went inside the tabernacle. Okay, page 6. The courtyard was 150 feet long, 100 cubits. 50 cubits wide, and the curtain screen around the courtyard was 7.5 feet tall, 5 cubits. Hangings around the courtyard were made of fine twined linen, blue, purple, scarlet, wrought with needlework. 20 pillars on the south, 20 on the north, 10 on the west, and 10 on the east. But the middle 4 were used for a gate. And that left 3 pillars on each side of the gate. We're told in chapter 27, 14 and 15 that there were 15 cubits on each side of the gate. So we had 4 of those pillars used there for the gate. 60 pillars altogether, 60 sockets, 60 hooks. Pillars were made of brass. That's very heavy. The hooks and fillets were made of silver. Sockets were made of brass.
John, wasn't the pillars made of shittim wood? They were made of brass?
They were made of brass as far as I could tell. Anybody have shittim wood? Silver were the hooks and fillets. They weren't the pillars. The pillars were made of brass. Pillars were just made of brass.
Okay.
Yeah. They were very heavy.
Man, that's real heavy. Woo!
This is heavy duty stuff. It could stand a windstorm. The pins for the pins were to, like what do you call them, Bob? Stakes to tie down the pillars, keep them from falling over. Pins were made of brass. All the tools and vessels connected with the maintenance of the tabernacle on the outside especially were made of brass.
Would brass be the hardest metal they had back then?
I don't think they weren't in the Iron Age yet, were they? I don't think so. I don't think God went by what's available so much as what represented something. The oil for the candlestick, pure olive oil, beaten. Holy anointing oil, included olive oil again. Priestly garments. All right, John David, who were the 4 sons of Aaron?
Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar.
Ithamar. Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, Ithamar. The 6 articles of clothing, Randall?
a breastplate, an ephod, a robe, a broidered coat,
That's an embroidered coat, same as we'd say.
a mitre, and a girdle.
Mitre.
Mitre.
And a girdle. The ephod was, how many onyx stones were on the ephod? 2. What was carved on each stone? The names of the children of Israel. 6 tribes carved. They were pretty big onyx stones, weren't they? Have 6 tribal names on each one. They were worn on Aaron's shoulders, the high priest's shoulders. And the breastplate had 12 stones, a tribe's name on each one. They were different kinds of precious stones. And the Urim and the Thummim, best I can remember, that means light and truth. The land of Ur, that's connected with light. Sunrise is to the east. Urim, light and truth. If I remember my Hebrew instruction well enough. Upon what part of the high priest's body were these stones? They were upon his heart. What was on the hem of the high priest's robe? A blue pomegranate, a golden bell. A purple pomegranate, a golden bell. A scarlet pomegranate, golden bell. All the way around the bottom of his garment, so that when he walked inside the tabernacle, there was music every time he took a step. It's pretty. And on his headpiece, these words were fashioned on the mitre. Holiness to the Lord. What a wonderful thing. Wow. There's an ancient Jewish tradition that around the high priest's waist somebody tied a rope so that if he dropped dead when he went into the most holy place, they could drag him back out. That is not true. God never commanded Moses to build a rope to haul the dead high priest out of the most holy. But there is an ancient legend about that. You forget that. Okay? Open up Exodus 25 and hold your finger at Exodus 37. I mentioned this before. I want to show you so you can, at least once in your life, said you actually did it, so you can tell your grandchildren. Exodus 25, this is Moses up on the Mount Sinai with the Lord. Exodus 25. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they bring me an offering. Of every man that giveth it willingly with his heart, ye shall take my offering. God's still that way. He's not a beggar. He doesn't want any money. He doesn't want any singing. He doesn't want any hand clapping. He doesn't want any praise from anybody who doesn't want to do it. He doesn't need it. You need it.
Amen.
Yeah.
You need Him to accept it. He doesn't need it. He's no beggar. You ought to see the trillions and quadrillions of angels and cherubim worshiping Him right now. He doesn't need us. Only if you have a willing heart and clean hands, then He'll accept it. And He told Moses to tell the people who willingly would give to build this tabernacle. Verse 8, Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. God's tent was going to be in the midst of all the tribes. Now that changes shortly after this, but right now His intention is to be right in the midst of the tribes. Changes briefly. We'll talk about that in a little bit. According to all that I show thee after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall you make it. And this is God commanding. They shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half the length, 1 cubit and a half the breadth. Now, turn over to 37. Verse 1. And Bezalel made the ark of the shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half the length and 1 cubit and a half the breadth, etc. That's what those two sections in Exodus are like. Exodus 25 through 31 or 30, I think it is, God is saying, Thou shalt. From Exodus 35 through 39, they did. Bezalel made. He made. It's just word for word most of the way. Some additional things are added to us along the way, but that's what we got. That's what you went through. Now, beginning in verse 18, we have an important word here. Thou shalt make 2 cherubims. You see the S on the end of cherubim, by the way? That's redundant. You know what the redundant means? It's like I ain't got no bread. You don't need to say I ain't got no bread. I ain't got bread's enough. Cherub equals 1. One masculine thing, one masculine word. The plural for cherub is cherubim. That is plural. You don't need an S on the end of it. But just so that we who don't know Hebrew, we English people in the King James world, would know that he's talking about more than one, they stuck an S on the end of it. But cherubim by itself means more than one. The feminine, have you ever heard of Ashtart? That's one of the ancient goddesses, female. A plural would be OTH. OTH is feminine plural. IM is masculine plural. So if you say cherubim, it's 2 or more. You really don't need that S. But they stick it on here in the King James anyway. Well, in verse 18, make 2 cherubims of gold of beaten work, shalt thou make them. The word work. I told you anything that had to do with the tabernacle is ceremonial. It is a work of the law, right? The word work appears in here, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 times. In chapter 25, verse 31. A candlestick of beaten work. Verse 36. Of one beaten work of pure gold. Chapter 26, verse 1. Work. Of cunning work shalt thou make them. It goes all the way through here. Chapter 26, verse 30. Thou shalt rear up the tabernacle according to the fashion thereof. The word fashion there is the same word as judgment, standard, decision, plan. This is how you make it. This is my judgment concerning how you build this thing. And if you don't measure up to my judgment, there's a death penalty on it. According to the standard or the plan or the judgment that I rendered to you on Mount Sinai. Look at chapter 28, verse 15. Thou shalt make the breastplate of judgment. That's exactly the same word. The breastplate of judgment. You know why it's called a breastplate of judgment? That's the ephod. Isn't that where the Urim and the Thummim were held? He pulled those out to kind of like, I don't know how that, nobody knows what kind of shape they were in, but they were, let's just say, a pair of dice. I don't know if they had markings on them or what. I don't know. Nobody does. But they were these 2 things, 2 small things that the priest held in his pouch, and sometimes God chose to use those 2 things to communicate to people. They would cast the lots, it's like rolling dice, I suppose, into the lap of the high priest. That skirt, that broidered robe, throw them into his lap, and however they landed, the Spirit of God was so strong in that tabernacle that it made it give him a response. David inquired of the Lord through a priest by doing that. And sometimes, well, they divided the land of Canaan up there between the 12 tribes using the lots, the Urim and the Thummim. I don't know how it worked, but it just worked. They're not described in detail. But God rendered his judgment through those Urim and Thummim, whatever they were, whatever shape they were. All right, now the stones for the high priest are in verse 17 through 20. Satan's stones were very, very similar to that. He had 3/4 of them. If you have any questions about anything along the way, let me know. chapter 30. Let's talk a little bit starting at verse 11. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, when you take the sum of the children of Israel, in the book of Numbers, he's going to count the people of Israel, the men of Israel, 20 years old and upward, who were healthy. He numbered the people for the army. When you do that, he says, you shall give every man a ransom for his soul. They shall give every man a ransom for his soul. It's a tax. When a king, or when Moses here, or later on in Israel, when a king numbered the people for the army, each person, when they were numbered, had to send the Lord an offering. That was behind David's motivation for numbering the people the time it was a sin, because God didn't tell him to do it. It was a method of collecting taxes that God had not imposed on his people. Whenever there was a numbering, there was a payday. It was a tax. They shall give every man a ransom. That's a gift for the Lord. And every man's tax was exactly the same, whether you were poor or rich. It was a very small amount. When thou numberest them, so that there won't be a plague among them. Of course, when David did it without the Lord, there was a plague. This they shall give every one that passeth among them that are numbered half a shekel, a very small amount. Half a shekel shall be the offering of the Lord. Every one that passeth among them that are numbered from 20 years old and upward shall give an offering to the Lord. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than half a shekel, when they give an offering unto the Lord to make an atonement for their souls. All right, now, chapter 31. And the Lord spake unto Moses, see, I have called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship, to devise cunning works, to work in gold and in silver and brass, and in cutting of stones to set them, and in carving of timber, to work in all manner of workmanship. He's getting the point across, isn't it? This is a work. And I, behold, I have given with him Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. And in the hearts of all that are wise-hearted I have put wisdom, that they may make all that I have commanded thee. Then he lists the details that he's given to Moses, the ark, the mercy seat, table, etc. In verse 12, he reminds Moses, saying, speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath day therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days may work be done, but in the 7th is the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. And he gave unto Moses, when he had made an end of communing with him upon Mount Sinai, 2 tables of testimony, tables of stone, written with the finger of God. And they were written on the front and the back of each stone, it tells us later. It wasn't like the pictures you see of all 10 commandments on one side of a stone. There were 2 stones, and they were written on the front and the back of each one. Now the people, meanwhile, they didn't know. There's 40 days now when God's concluding all this with Moses. The people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mountain. The people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said, up, make us gods which shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. And Aaron said unto them, well, break off the earrings, the golden earrings, which are in the ears of your wives and sons and daughters, and bring them to me. And all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received them at their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool after he had made it a gold molten calf. And they said, These are your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar in front of it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, Tomorrow is a feast unto Jehovah. Does that make it holy? But it was to Jehovah, Glenn.
I know it, still don't make it holy.
But it was in the name of the true God.
So what? God told them not to do it, not to make any graven image.
God said, don't make a graven image, so they made a graven image to honor God.
Makes a lot of sense.
So when Aaron proclaimed in the name of Jehovah, there would be a feast day to honor him at that altar in front of the golden calf. God didn't blush and say, oh, you really, that's really, I don't know what to say. He knew exactly what to say. God is not a beggar. So here they are building a golden calf. Aaron's proclaiming a feast unto Jehovah. And they rose up early on the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and to get drunk and rose up, and they got into an orgy of lust. That's what the word play means. They got naked. We'd find out that here in a little while. It was the same kind of filthy religious worship of the gods that they had known in Egypt and other cultures knew. Meanwhile, up at the top of the mountain with God and Moses, the Lord said to Moses, Go, get thee down, for your people that you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. Now Moses could hardly have believed this. I mean, he's sitting there in the presence of the terrifying glory of God, and he cannot imagine somebody building a golden calf already. It probably didn't seem to Moses like 40 days had gone by. That'd be my guess. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made a molten calf and have worshipped it, and have sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which have brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said unto Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them, that I may consume them. I will make of you, Moses, a great nation. I'll start all over again, Moses, with you. It would have been no trouble with God to do that. I'll start with you just as I started with Abraham. Let me just wipe out the whole lot of them. And Moses begged God not to do this. He besought the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your wrath wax hot against your people that you brought forth out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? I didn't open that Red Sea. You opened that Red Sea. Why should the Egyptians speak and say, for mischief did Jehovah bring them out, and to slay them in the mountains? I knew they were no good. That God just wanted to get them out there and destroy them, and to consume them from the face of the earth. Turn from your fierce wrath, and repent of this destruction, this evil against thy people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, thy servants, to whom thou swearest by thine own self, and saidest unto them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land that I have spoken of will I give it unto your seed, and they shall inherit it forever. And this convinced the Lord. Of course, he wanted to hear Moses say that. And the Lord repented of the evil which he thought to do unto his people. And Moses turned and went down from the mount, and the 2 tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tables were written on both their sides. On the one side and on the other were they written. And the tables were the work of God. And the writing was the writing of God, graven upon the tables. Now he met Joshua when he was coming down, before they got far enough down to see the camp. And Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted. They were having such a loud, drunken orgy that it sounded to Joshua like that battle with the Amalekites, with people screaming and all kinds of noises going on. And Joshua said, "There's a noise of war in the camp, Moses." And Moses said, "No, it's not the voice of them that shout for winning the victory, for mastery. Neither is it the voice of them that cry for being overcome, but the noise of them that sing do I hear." What kind of singing sounds like a battle? What kind of singing would sound like a battle? Some of this modern rock music would sound like a battle going on. Wild, godless. And it came to pass, as soon as he came near to the camp, that Moses saw the calf and the dancing. And Moses' anger waxed hot, and he cast the tables that were written with God's finger. Boy, you talk about fury. Moses had a fault that about 5 times, you count them on your fingers of one hand, that it just got past that point where it pleased God. This is one of them. But this was one of them that is debatable. I'd say have one foot across the line and one not. Maybe smashing the tables that God gave him, that God carved out of the rock, that God wrote on. His anger just filled it. Moses could easily have killed men right now, and some died here very shortly at Moses' commandment, because his wrath was just beyond his control. He took those 2 precious tables with the handwriting of God on them and smashed them at the bottom of the mountain. He was so angry, and broke them beneath the mountain. Then he took the calf which they had made. Let's see what kind of honor Moses had for the calf. He burnt it in the fire, and then he pounded it to powder. And then he took the powder and threw it on the water source, and then he made the children of Israel drink that golden calf. And he wasn't finished yet. And Moses said unto Aaron, can you imagine being Aaron right now?
Oh, man.
Now Moses left Aaron in charge to make sure everything went well. And here comes Moses walking up to Aaron. What did this people to you? What did this people unto thee that thou hast brought so great a sin upon them? And Aaron said, oh, now look, don't let not the anger of my Lord wax hot. You know the people, they're just set on mischief. Yeah, you know how these people are. They said unto me, make us gods which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. And I said, well, okay, whoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I threw it in the fire, and all of a sudden out this calf came. That's what he said. They brought me all this stuff, and I just threw it away. I just threw it in the fire. And out came this calf. You should have been here, Moses. It was something. Whew. Now, we're not told what Moses said or did at that point.
Right.
But there are some times that you can say or do nothing. And here's Moses so full of fury that he could have cut Aaron into little bitty pieces. And Aaron said, I threw all that gold they gave me, I threw it in the fire, and out came this calf. What could Moses say? The Bible just skips to the next scene. Forget that. Moses must have just walked away from Aaron. He just walked around and saw all these drunken, naked people that had just entered into covenant with Jehovah to be his people and to obey him. Jehovah had just spoken to them right out of heaven. They'd heard his voice. And the first thing he ever said to them. Thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Amen.
And the second thing is build no graven images. Now they've got one. I mean, just 40 days before. When Moses saw the people were naked, for Aaron had made them naked unto the shame among their enemies. Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, Who is on Jehovah's side? Wow. Let him come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together unto him. And he said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, that's his wife, and every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and they fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. That's people. So what the commandment was, go get your sword and just go. Whoever you meet first. If it's your little boy running up to you saying, Daddy, kill him. If it's your mother, if it's your wife, just kill until I say stop. And they just started slaughtering whoever it was. And they must have been their relatives first. That's where they lived. Mother, father, wife, cousin, brother, children, whoever it was. Without respect of persons, just kill. Until God told Moses, and Moses told them, that's enough. For Moses had said to those who are on the Lord's side, Consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, even every man upon his son and upon his brother, that he may bestow upon you a blessing this day. And because the Levites did that, I used to have this as a major event. God completely changes his whole plan for the priesthood of Israel. Up until now, I think I showed you this in Exodus 13, God had determined that the oldest, the patriarch of each clan would be the priest. The head of the house would be the priest for that house. The firstborn in every family. Now, he rejects all of that. Now the Levites are going to be the priestly clan. Nobody but them. They're going to be the tribe that God uses for his service. Because of this. Because they were on the Lord's side that day. And it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, You have sinned a great sin. And now I will go up unto the Lord, peradventure I may make atonement for your sin. And Moses went back up the mountain to God. And he said, Oh, this people have sinned a great sin, and have made them gods of the gold. Yet now, look at this. If thou wilt forgive their sin, and it's understood he's saying, please do. And if not, then blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written. And the Lord said unto Moses, No. Whosoever has sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. Now therefore go on back down, lead the people into the place of which I have spoken unto thee. Behold, my angel shall go before thee. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. I'm still thinking about what I'm going to do, Moses. They're not going to get by with this. And that's when the people started having some diseases. They left Egypt, all of them, perfectly whole. And the Lord plagued the people because they made the calf which Aaron made.